Well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning on our webinar, "The Road We Must Travel Again" with Marc Estes. If you haven't had the chance to be able to meet Marc or engage with him at the Spire conference, I think you've been to like every one,
Yeah.
and one of our longtime partners with Spire. You're in for a real treat this morning because Marc is kind of like one of these rare kind of leaders where he's served as a senior pastor of Manna House in Portland and also president of the Portland Bible College. So he gets the ministry side. Like he knows what it's like to stand up and preach and say, man, I hope this joke's going to land. And also is the co-founder of and CEO of Visitor Reach, which is a tech organization that helps really more than a tech organization. I think is really a lot of the heart behind his book in helping churches position themselves to do just what we're talking about today, to reach their communities for Jesus. And so we're grateful, Marc, to have you partner with Spire, and we're grateful to have you for the webinar today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, the partnership's great. Just thanks again for the time. Hope that it's beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, so I'm going to just jump in, and if you guys have questions or ways you hope to engage, please use the chat, and we will dedicate a portion of our time for Q&A and dialogue for you to interact and engage. Engage with the conversation. So let's just jump right in, Marc, to your book. The first words in your introduction, I love it, is "I love the local church." And I love that you start there, but I also have done ministry for more than a minute, and know there may be church leaders on our call today that may not feel the same way. So give us some encouragement, give us some hope. Why do you love the local church?
Yeah, well, I start with that statement first and foremost, is because a lot of the book, what I'm trying to do is to speak to leaders about some of the shifts that need to take place. So I want to make sure that I started with this thought that, hey, I love the local church, but let's be honest, I want you to smile so I can kick your teeth in a little bit, so to speak. But first of all, I know if there's people on this call, again, like you and me, Chaz, that have, worked in the local church. And if you're struggling with that thought, I get it. I've been part of 3 local churches in my life over 45 years. And that's hard to even say out loud. That's been 45 years. And every one of them, has been ran by imperfect leaders. Like I'm one of those, right? And we're in an imperfect world, and we're attempting to help imperfect people. Yeah, despite all of the church's imperfections, and by the way, every one of you on this call have those as well, it's still God's chosen vessel to reveal his heart to the world, right? Jesus said it very clearly, hey, I'm gonna build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. It doesn't mean that the gates aren't going to be assaulting. Again, I understand they're stationary, but the enemy is constantly wanting to assault and derail and create confusion. But really, what he's trying to help us understand in that, what I wanted to say is that even despite all of our imperfections and challenges, if we just trust in the instrument, the local church that he created, and stay in the boat, we're going to make it to the other side, right? And again, I think that there's a lot of us, that have either been hurt by the church, even as a leader. Before, Chad, we were talking about some of our personal challenges in life and what have you. And so we can be disappointed by the church or by the people of the church or an eldership or a board. And it can be exhausting, right? And I like to say it this way, sometimes loving people in the church feels like loving your extended family at Thanksgiving, right? We all have a couple special cousins, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
the reality is, at the same time, there's still beauty in the room and family in the room, and that's really what life's about. God put us together to make us better, not bitter, if you will, right? And so
Yeah.
I think it's really important, as we start this conversation, because we're going to talk a lot about, some of the challenges that we're dealing with, that you hear my heart and that we kind of resonate with it, is that the local church is the hope of the world, despite some of our challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, that's so well said. And you reminded me, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, getting together with family is like fish. After 3 days, it starts to smell.
That's
and,
so good.
and whether it's the people in the church or whether it's the people outside of the church, there can be some of the most beautiful and God-filled, just wonderful people in the church, and yet also, one of your, I think, helpful evaluations throughout the book is how you observe and engage with culture. I liked how you said this in particular. I think you were describing like the spiritual landscape, and you
Right.
said they're not anti-God. They're just unsure if he still takes appointments or if the church is even in his contact list. In fact, 98% of churches don't even show up when someone is searching for one online. So this is something, as we said before, you're the co-founder and president of Visitor Reach, who kind of helps just this. So I think you would know this. Tell us more, like what leads to this disconnect between being spiritually hungry that it seems so obvious in our culture
Yeah.
and the disconnect from not necessarily finding the church.
Yeah, it's a great thought, and again, it is the foundation of a lot of what I'm talking about is helping us to try to understand the culture we're hoping to reach. And I use this analogy often, and that is that society's trying to jump into our boat out on the lake, but the challenge is that our boat's still in the parking lot behind on a trailer, right? And in other words, they're looking for us. They're looking for spiritual answers. They just can't seem to find us, really. And so and I think the disconnect isn't necessarily a hunger problem. I think it's often one of three things. And I think it's an accessibility problem. I think it's a clarity problem, or I think it's a proximity problem. And probably most the proximity problem. I think at the heart of it, um, you know, there's so much of what we're doing right now is rooted in this thing. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, is in this gospel of come problem.
Yeah.
And really, in this moment in time and season where I believe that from COVID onward, the Lord's trying to shift our philosophy to a gospel of go. And what we're finding again is that people are really spiritually curious right now. I mean, it's an exciting time. It's like fishing during the salmon run. But, many churches, they're living life in kind of their redeemed community on the other side of the stained glass windows. And, we continue to speak our insider language and, one that the culture doesn't understand, and we're continuing to run our meetings, our times, our people, and we're just kind of trying to just keep our church afloat when the world out there is screaming, for answers. And if I I get the privilege of reading literally hundreds of thousands of texts. Not that I read all of them, but we can see what's going on in the pulse of churches today by looking at our all of the data that comes in. And your average unchurched neighbor, they just want to know if you care, like if
Yeah.
you're there, like do you know their name, do you know their need, do you understand they have problems? So they're not a project. It's not like something that you're trying to invite to so that you get another number. It's just like they're just wondering if you care, and like are you willing to build a relationship with me? And when they finally show up in the parking lot, they really, I'm going to say this kindly, they don't really care as much about your message, right? They're wondering, they're thinking about like, where do I park and what do I wear, and are my kids going to be safe, and is anyone going to talk to me, and am I going to feel weird? And like it's so important to understand that where people are at. I think I mentioned in the book too, Chaz. There's a Pew Research did a study where 30% of U.S. adults they go online regularly to search for information about religion, right? And
Yeah.
we're talking about 7.25 hours a day.
Yeah.
America's going to send 5.5 billion texts today. 60% of all marriages last year started by meeting someone online. I mean, this is a Gutenberg moment, and they're out there, they're screaming, they're asking questions. And the reality is that when they search, they just are having a real hard time finding us. And when they do find us, It's all just about come to service, come, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it all over again. Come to Easter. Let's keep doing that. But it's always come, come, come. My place, my term, my people, all of those things. And they just want to know, like, do you care? Do you know my name? Like, will you reach out to me? Do you want to build a relationship with me? Right. And so this is the gap, right? And churches find it hard to engage with people digitally, and but the reality is that that's where people are at,
Mhm.
and where we need to really try to find some time to be in there,
Yeah. Well, and I think you do this so well throughout your book, which I love that it's not an either or. It's not like,
Right,
hey,
that's right.
we have to choose one or the other. It's a both and. But the first and foremost is to live and be like Jesus and be in proximity. And what better story than the Good Samaritan,
Right.
to be able, I love how you use that as the kind of the backbone, as the story that Jesus very disruptively told and has
Yeah.
continued to disrupt for generations and centuries. Yeah, especially that moment in particular that you're talking about. I loved how you talked about the buffet, where it's like we have a spiritually hungry world and there's a buffet. They just aren't always getting to to the good stuff. And I think that Good Samaritan story helps us. Tell us more. Why the Good Samaritan as a centerpiece for this moment in
Yeah,
history?
I think that the Good Samaritan story is not just a story about compassion, although it is. It really is, and I'm going to use this word loosely. I don't know where your theology lies, but I believe it's a prophetic picture of the kind of church that this moment requires. It is disruptive in nature, but it's also redemptive in nature, right? I'm convinced that we're living on the crest of one of the greatest awakenings in history, yet it's going to require a different posture in culture to unlock it, right? And I think, if we go back to 2020 in these last 5 years and all of the challenges and pressures that are coming our way, the Lord's trying to recalibrate and readjust the way that we do church. And so Jesus, he gives us this Good Samaritan story, when the most spiritually active people in narrative weren't necessarily the most spiritual, right? They were kind of going through the motions. They knew what to say, memorize scripture. Like, you just go through where that religious lawyer was, or the Levite and priest. And the story begins with a religious lawyer, and his heart really needed confronting before the road could even be understood, right? He started with a heart issue, right? His question, like, what must I do to inherit eternal life, and who is my neighbor? He's asking these questions not because he wanted to learn how to love well, but he was really saying, like, how little can I do and still consider myself righteous? I mean, he was going through the motions. And then you bring in the priest and the Levite in the story. They have the position and vocabulary and routine and religious credibility and all that stuff. But this is what they're lacking: proximity and compassion, right? And again, it says that the Levite and the priest, they saw their condition, but they did what? They went to the other side. And
Yeah.
again, I'm just going to say this, and I don't want to stereotype the church. Let's go through the list of what's happened the last 5 or 6 years. Let's look at COVID. Let's look at, are you Republican, Democrat? Let's talk about transgenderism. Let's talk about gay marriage. Let's talk about immigration. Like, let's go down the list, right? We see the condition, but because it's so toxic, what have we done? We've gone to the other side. And we've got to realize that, the same thing like that religious lawyer is that we can have a faith that can, discuss eternal life while stepping over wounded humanity on the other side of the road, right? And so it's so important for us to recognize that what this story is trying to do is it's trying to help us get back to the road again, our primary purpose, right? Reaching the wounded, those people in front of us. And maybe we'll talk about it later, but it's the whole half of the book, the back part of the book, talks about the 7 philosophical shifts that I
Mhm.
believe that the Lord is screaming to us right now to readjust while we're at a place where people are so open. If 74% of people are still open, but 85% of churches are declining, we have to say there is a proximity issue, or at a bare minimum, a philosophy issue, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why this story is so pertinent to where we're at today as church.
Well, and yes, and in particular to that priest and Levite, man, it's hard not to, if you're a church leader, they were the church leader, yeah, they were the spiritual leaders of the day, and like my understanding, a part of that story is not wanting to maybe touch a half dead, like a dead body. That would have made them ceremoniously unclean and unfit to be able to do like their duties, which I think is a part of the disruption of the story is as church leaders is, are we going to walk this road? Are we going to engage people who are clearly hurting? And you give so much evidence in that, but maybe if you can unpack for us, a little more, you say this, you suggest the priest and Levite saw but avoided the wounded man, just like many churches that are so busy doing church that they've lost their mission of being the church, salt and light to a world that is looking for answers. What do you think are some of the issues churches, facing today that address, why do you believe so many leaders feel stuck right now? Because some of it is just like the busyness of ministry and the pressure of all of that is like, how am I going to add like actually caring for somebody who's half dead on the side of the road? What can you help us with?
Yeah, the theologians for centuries have tried to answer really the intent behind the Levite and priest, why they went to the other side. You had mentioned a few of them. They're unclean, maybe didn't want to be ceremonially unclean, but could be that they're busy. They were going, like, you could go through the long list of all of the excuses. And I think that Jesus allowed that to remain unanswered for a reason, is
Yeah.
because we get to fill in the blank. At the end of the day, what happened, regardless of what your issue is, the reality is that we've chosen to make people in the ditch not a priority. That is the issue. And that's what Jesus was really trying to bring apart. And I think what's happening with a lot of leaders today, we feel stuck because we're just carrying real burdens. Like, I get it, man. I was a pastor for 40 years. We had a church of multiple thousands and 5 campuses and president of a Bible college and 300 employees in Portland or Babylon, whatever you want to call it, during COVID and Antifa. Like, you talk about a season, I get that season. So we're dealing with all of that internal challenges, but on top of it, what's happening is that we're facing declining trust and cultural confusion and resistance from the very people we're trying to love, right? And that's a real big issue. Is that there's all of these challenges taking place internally inside the building, internally in our own lives, as well as externally. And I just come back and I ask the question, maybe we need to look at the scoreboard. And again, I mentioned it before, there's these 7 things that Jesus unpacks at the back of the story. To me, it is like, this is a 21st century book of Acts, New Testament model of what we need to do in this day, in this hour, to get us back on the road again. And I think with that, they're the very things that get us unstuck, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so good. One of which being, you mentioned earlier in our conversation, this gospel of come versus the gospel of go. Break that down a little practically for our pastors. You're trying to lead with real limitation, what we're talking about, but how do we embrace that mindset of gospel of go, of what the story really seems to lead us to?
Yeah, so Jesus, he gives us 7 things that we need to do really to get back on the road again. But he starts with the first one, and it is a proximity question. It says, and when the Good Samaritan saw his condition, he went to where he was at. The remaining 6 mean nothing if you're not next to the person you're trying to reach. And I believe that's why Jesus led with that. And so let me say it this way. The gospel of come says, come to our building, come to our service, come to Easter, come to our event, come to our world, my people, my time, my language, my culture. And with a very reluctant culture today, it just seems to be increasingly unpopular for people to want to make that step as the first step of their spiritual journey. But on the flip side, when you think about the gospel of go, it's kind of having this mentality like, hey, we're sent, we care about you, we've got time for you. Like, I want to build relationship with you. We desire to help you, right? It's understanding that mission isn't just fulfilled by hoping we get people into our building. Like, let's not stop doing that, right? I always say go and be so they will come and see, but we take out the go and be part, right? And so practically and I think you said it earlier, it's not about us having to pick an attractional invitational model versus a missional model. You have to have the both and, but it means that you have to lead in the right order, right? You've got to gather to scatter, or you've got to assemble to assign, or inspire to deploy. And for churches with real limitations, this is where this becomes really encouraging, because, again, the attractional model says you need the biggest screens, the biggest lights, the biggest building, and you're going, man, I can't do that. The reality is that this can become actually freeing, because you don't need any of that. You don't need the biggest budget and the flashiest buildings. You just need to teach people how to go into the highways and byways, compel them to come in. What does it mean to turn the world upside down? Last time that we saw a great movement in our nation was with the Jesus People movement, and that was simply because we got people to go, and ultimately they would come. And so I think it's really important for us to just look at that. And Chaz, that's a whole conversation in itself. Is like, how do we turn our entire world inside out, our staffing, our budgets, our programs? I always say, like children's ministry, our goal is not to raise godly kids. Our goal is to raise godly kids who in turn love the world, reach ungodly kids, and teach them to in turn do likewise. And so it's looking at everything afresh, going, how do I make everything that I do with the go culture? Because if we don't do that, what happens by nature is we will continue to I'll say this kindly, rearrange lawn chairs on the Titanic. We'll just keep going through like the religious lawyer.
Yeah.
He is probably a great guy. He probably loved the Lord and tithed and memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, but Jesus is just going, like, time out. 66% of my ministry was evangelistic. I'd like for you to kind of model that. And so he was trying to lovingly adjust him to say, hey, maybe you need to have a different foundation of how you do life and how you do ministry. So,
Yeah, I love the metaphor. You can either be in the hole digging business or the shovel distribution
yeah,
business,
there
and
you go.
it can be pretty taxing to be in the dictating where each and every hole is dug versus, as you said, like the gospel of go is like, hey, God's given you a unique purpose. He's given you a unique
Yeah,
story. He's given you people that only you can reach. And
yeah,
that is a part of the excitement and the journey. But I think it also gets back to the heart of it. And to go back to that idea kind of burnout, you had said in your book, burnout's not a workload issue, but a proximity issue. Can you kind of connect those dots, explain? I'm
yeah.
sure that hits a lot of leaders. What unpack that more for us of how those things are connected.
Well, I have a really important word in there. I said it's not only, right, a workload issue. So I
Yeah.
believe that the pressures of ministry are incredible. I mean, I did that almost. I almost didn't make it. A whole nother podcast in itself, but I almost didn't make it after those 5 years from 2020 to 25. So I don't want to undermine the workload issue, but I wonder also if it's a proximity issue. Like, is it possible that we could be drained from being too far from the kind of ministry that made us first alive?
Yeah.
There's something that happens again. There's this exhaustion that can come when we only spend our time filled with meetings and maintenance and problem solving and marriage crisis and budget issues and organizational pressures, like all of that stuff, like that can drain you. But what I have found myself, that when I find these places where God shows up, where I see a living human being outside of the wall encounter Jesus, there's something that happens inside of me that just comes alive. And I think that's why Jesus said twice, go and do likewise, right? He knew it was a key, not only just to helping the guy in the ditch, but maybe giving us some longevity in ministry. And, we were talking about hiking earlier, but we lived down on the Strand in Hermosa Beach, and I would take walks every day. And maybe you read that in the book. And I was just walking one day, and there was a guy there that I had seen multiple times with a little umbrella on the beach there with his bike. And I just felt Holy Spirit quicken me to go over and talk to him. Said, "Hey, what's your name?" He says, "My name's Mike." I said, "How long you been out here?" He says, "20 years." And we began this conversation that ultimately turned into a friendship. And, he had told me how he'd gone into church and tried church one time, and that ultimately they told him he had to cut his hair, take a shower, take off his hat, then he could come back and be welcome. And he said, so he just decided not to do church anymore. And that one conversation turned into two, which turned into a daily conversation. And it was just, his name's changed in my book. Obviously, I just gave it away. But Michael was my morning reminder, every morning as the sun was coming up to just go, I just touched someone and made an eternal impact on someone's life before I got busy doing church. And sometimes we can be so busy doing church, we forget to be the church, right? And so, my encouragement is, what does that look like for us as pastors? Do you have time? I talked in the book about my 500 hours of ride-alongs in police cars. I did that, number one, because I wanted to understand that part of our community. But number two, I wanted to get away from the noise and just see where the problems and pain of our city was. And I couldn't wait for another ride along. I'd go from 4 in the afternoon to 2 in the morning and would be tired the next day. But I was so energized for the week, just going like I got to pray with people and help officers understand about how the Lord could touch their marriage and all that kind of stuff. So I think we have to just get back to thinking about how can we get outside the walls of our church. I mentioned Jesus, 66% of his ministry was outside kind of his sphere of relationships. Paul, 54%. That kind of is a biblical pattern for us. So I think that
Yeah.
might help with some of it. It may not be the only thing, but I think it can really help with our burnout issues too as well.
Yeah, well, and it helps reorient. That. I think it was Stephen Covey, the big rocks illustration. You put the
Yeah.
small sand in first, and then the big rocks don't fit. But if you flip it, if you put first things first, and you put the big rocks in, and then the larger, and then the larger, all the way. There's so much more that fits in our finite cup, in our finite jar, and also the story you just told, and the many stories that are throughout the book. What I love is how real it is, because it is, it comes from a place of people you're engaging with on the road, like the story of Sharon, and the others that you describe, society as half dead, just as the guy on the road was half dead. You kind of categorize those into beliefs, perceptions, behaviors, and issues. Tell us more about that chapter and how those frameworks can kind of be helpful as we seek to engage with wisdom and grace and discernment, the culture and the people we find around us.
Yeah, sure. Well, the story of Sharon was I was just at Safeway getting some lunch, ran down to just grabbing a dwalla and a banana and a bagel, and talking to the lady behind the counter, just asked her, how her day was going. She says, well, it's just another day. And I just felt quickened to say, well, it doesn't have to be that way. There is another way. And before I knew it, I was out in the parking lot. She had left her register screaming out saying, show me what's the other way? What's the other way? And pulled her arms up, and she looked like a burn victim with the hundreds of scars where she had cut herself and burned herself, and from the neck down she had been abusing her body. And I won't go into detail about some of the trauma and stuff going on in her world and life, and very abusive lesbian relationship involved in demonic activity. Her parents tried to sacrifice her in a cult when she was a child. And
Wow.
here I was in this conversation with this lady, and an invite to church wasn't probably what she needed at that point. And I learned this principle through her, although I preached it before, is really that you have to understand before being understood. Like if I didn't understand her past, her beliefs, her perceptions, her issues that she was facing, the gospel couldn't bring the life-giving value that she needed. You know, I always say that text plus context equals revelation, right? And so we can bring right truth, but if it's not contextualized, what
Yeah.
we find is that it doesn't have any kind of apparent value for that person. I was in Portland and a guy came up to me and started witnessing to me. And for 30 minutes, he just preached the gospel at me. And at the end, he asked me, he goes, well, do you want to get saved? I said, well, I already am. And he says, well, why didn't you tell me? And I said, well, why didn't you ask me? Right. And it was a great lesson for him that day of just going, maybe what we need to do is slow down and really understand before being so quickly to proclaim. And so I tried to do this with my leaders. I try to do that with everybody that I work with is like ask questions, don't make statements. People love to hear their name. They love to hear their opinion. Tell me your story. Tell me what you've gone through. And what happens is it removes all of that awkwardness that allows you to have these meaningful, beautiful conversations with people. And so, I often told, my staff, I'm hoping that we just don't, read content, but that we become it, right? We become the living,
Yeah.
we become the Jesus to the person, what they need. And so I did a whole chapter just trying to break down our nation today. What are we believing? Where are people at? What are their perceptions? What are their behaviors? What do they think of the church? What do they think of you? And I think just that chapter alone, just going like, oh my gosh, that's my neighbor, right? And that's the front part of the book where the religious lawyer goes, who's my neighbor? We better understand that those are the people that God's put in front of you to reach.
Yeah.
The person struggling with transgenderism, the person that's transition, the person that votes unlike you, let's just go down the list. And we keep getting these opportunities. God keeps opening up, ripping open our nation with these cultural tensions, and we go to the other side. And like these are the opportunities for us to lean in and love hurting, broken people. And I think spiritual maturity is best defined by loving people who are most unlike you and
Yeah.
being okay with that. You can have unconditional love and still walk in uncompromising truth. They don't have to conflict each other. And how do we carry those twin towers of truth in life? A lot of the people I led to Christ, gay, people that were gay commanders of police departments, and people coming into our church that had already transitioned, and like that's the harvest, right? And so we got to understand before we're understood. And if we can't get that in our mind, we're going to lose the opportunity to reach the greatest awakening in history. And so goes the leader, so goes the church, right?
Yeah.
Introverted leaders build introverted churches. Evangelistic leaders build unevangelistic churches. Man, get into it and get some stories, get some life experiences with people that are really unlike you. It preaches really well, and it also will just motivate your church in a significant way. So I know it's a really long answer, but man, that is a huge part of the book of just helping us try to figure that out.
Well, and also leading us to understand evangelism, it's a journey. It's not a pitch. It's not a series of propositions. It's a way of life. Come and follow me. I imagine that's kind of the shift, one of the shifts that you're hoping leaders make. Tell us more about that and maybe other shifts that this story invites us to disrupt in our church leadership.
Yeah, I got a text just the other day, 25 years later, from Sharon. She's still in Portland, but it started with an encounter, but the encounter wasn't just simply to proclaim something. It was to begin something. It was for me to take a journey with her, with my wife, and help her, right? And sometimes we've trained people in our church. And back in the 70s and 80s at work, because we lived in a Christian culture. So we would just go out and do the four spiritual laws or two question tests and lead someone to Christ, and they would kind of gravitate to the church. We're not in Kansas anymore, right? And we have to realize that the gospel's not a project or a product, and people aren't a project. Like evangelism is about excuse me, faithfully walking with people relationally in truth and love and patience and courage. And that takes time. Like you have to have margin to be able to build relationship with people. People actually want you to love them and to care for them and to build a relationship with them. I tell another story in the book about another guy that I met on the street corner, 52 necklaces. He is a white magic Satanist, Calvinist, Catholic Jew. And it wasn't just this idea where I was going to share the gospel with him. One conversation began to two to three to five, ultimately would lead him to Christ. You need to read the story. It's amazing. But again, I built relationships with this guy, or a relationship with this guy for years, just trying to help him understand. And I think it's important to understand, especially now, that if people are more open today than they were since the Jesus People movement, and they're institutionally cautious on the other side, relationship matters more than everything. And so we've got to realize that this is such a critical part of what we're doing. Is again, people, they're just not looking for an apologetic approach. They're looking for an answer to their pain. And there's a lot of pain out there, right? And I talk about the Holmes-Ray scale. The higher the pain, the more open to the gospel, right? Someone, a spouse dying is 100, you having a hangnail is like a 5. And because society today is so broken, if we can understand their pain point and come alongside of them and just love them, like with Sharon or with the guy I was just talking about, it's over that time of just building relationship and trust that they'll ultimately give their life to Christ. So I think it's man, it is an issue, right? Spend some time with people
Yeah. Yeah.
outside the walls of the church. Yeah.
No, that's so good. So good, Mark. Well, hey, I want to invite anybody, if you've got questions, to be able to submit those in the chat. Would love to be able to hear from you and engage, if you've got anything that you would like to discuss. Otherwise, Mark and I can chat all day. Reminder to be able to do that. Now, Mark, why don't you tell us about the new Reach assessments? And I know, we've had dedicated webinars that people can go back and watch our previous conversations more specific to visitor reach. But I think there's a correlation and a connection in some of those opportunities. Tell us about why you created them, what you hope to see some of those resources spark in the life of the churches.
Yeah. It is actually when I was writing the book and I was, just unpacking that whole idea of the religious lawyer, when he asked the question, who is my neighbor? He thought he was okay. He thought his I'm going to say quote unquote church, his circle, his environment was okay. And from an internal perspective, it probably was. And again, I get the wonderful privilege of working with pastors and leaders all over the world. And when we look at the scorecard, 85% of churches plateaued and declining, 12% growing through transfer growth, only 3% of churches in America growing through conversion growth. We realize we have a scoreboard problem. And so I thought, what would it look like if we developed a tool or two tools actually that would help a church, first of all, the pastor understand his evangelism health. And then the second assessment is that the pastor and the team would understand the church's health. And again, this isn't necessarily to beat anybody up. It's just to, like what Jesus did with the religious lawyer, is to reveal an issue so that hopefully you'd be provoked or inspired enough to be able to make some changes. And so at visitorreach.com, if you go to the resource page, go down to assessment, there's 2 assessments. They're free. One is for the leader, one is for the church. I want to strongly encourage you to take the test yourself as the leader. And then if you have your entire team, have your team take the test and then have your team score the church and start talking about the results. We'll send you a 7-page report, a very exhaustive report. It talks about the 6 areas of the church where you're strong and weak, and it talks about the personal areas, 5 areas of your life where you're strong or weak. And then it's going to give you some resources and some things that you might be able to do. But it is a great catalyst to really take this conversation today and to use it as just kind of a provocative tool that you can use to begin to move your church forward, especially before Easter. I mean, while people are really open. So I would really encourage you to do that. And once again, that the assessments are free. I think you're going to find them to be amazing. So that was kind of the heart behind it, and hopefully there'll be tools that will really help you. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's great. I just put the link to the digital health assessment in the chat there.
hey,
And David
let me say
asked,
this. Let me say this too. That the digital health assessment is another tool, although it's an assessment, and I'd recommend that too. That's really understanding the digital health.
yeah.
But really, it's visitorreach.com and then /reach dash assessments. Or if you just go to the resource, pull down, there's an assessment. And what you're going to find there is that there's a leader assessment and a church assessment. Those are different than the digital health, although 3 are important. I think you're going to find them to be pretty amazing. Just don't be mad at me after you get the results.
Um, okay. I see him now. I'm gonna drop that link as well here, um, in the chat. Mark, while I'm doing that, David asked, "What is Visitor Reach?" So, could you explain a little more? What is
Yeah.
Visitor Reach? What do you guys do with that?
Yeah.
Kind of gotten the why behind, but maybe some of the
Yeah.
mechanics.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if I could just put it in a sentence, is that we help churches reach people and keep people. And so we realize there's philosophical shifts that have happened in culture. People more open to the gospel than ever, people more reluctant than ever to walk through the door of a church. They're hanging out in digital spaces 7.25 hours a day, and the church isn't there to engage them. So we've come along aside of a church and we say, let's help you do 5 things: digital health optimization, personal ad campaigns, connect with them digitally. We have a beautiful tech stack that we use with texting to be able to engage with people over a period of weeks or months till they feel enough trust to come to the church. We use tap technology for you to connect with people inside the church and outside the church, and ultimately a coaching service. So those 5 things, all bundled in front door to back door, is built on everything we're talking about today. So we're not a marketing company. I'm not just another texting service or another tap service. We have built a philosophical framework. Like, I get the local church. I love the local church. I get the local church, but we are not on the road again. I just finished another book called The New Roman Road. It'll come out this summer, or pretty close to summer. And it's just talking about embracing the new digital frontier. It's a Gutenberg moment. We can reach people 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, but we're still relying on 70 minutes a week on a Sunday morning service. So how do we get the church into the new digital frontier is really what the book's about, but ultimately what we're trying to do is as a organization. And I would love to do this, Chaz, no apology. If you want to talk more about what we specifically do, just go to visitor.com, and on that front page, it'll say book a demo, or if you want to talk to an expert. If you just click there, it literally, it's a non-obligatory 10-15 minute conversation. We'll unpack it a little bit for you. And then we'll just do a whole presentation. You get your team together, we'll walk you through, lift up the hood, and talk about everything that we do. And we believe that we can help you reach a lot more people for Jesus. So that's kind of what Visitor Reach is about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, and I'll let you know. I'll follow up with all these resources
Okay. Yeah.
for you if that's something that's interested. I encourage just a little bit of time with Mark's team can go a long way. They've got a great team, and doing really cutting edge stuff built on the foundation of the way we've been talking. Jesus has invited us to, as he said, philosophically, not just functionally or maybe technology based. So. And David, I love you're building tools to help people reach their faith. I mean, I think that's so important. That's what this is all about. This is what we're doing and what Jesus invites us to. So I really appreciate everyone spending their time with us today. As we sign off, Marc, any closing words, encouragement that you would have for our church leaders today?
Yeah, and I say this not to sell a book, but I would love to equip you more. I mean, we just I wet your whistle today. Go to Amazon, go to markestes.com, one of the two, order the book. And let me encourage you to, the end of every chapter has a pretty exhaustive discussion area where you discuss, you digest, you do. It is a great tool to walk your teams through. And I just encourage you, get a book for every one of your leaders and go, hey, we're going to spend 12 weeks and we're going to take an hour a week to unpack this together. I think it will inspire you, it will equip you. But would love for you to do that, just to go and grab a book. And other than that, let me just encourage you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for fighting the good fight of faith. I know many of you are already in the trench, in the ditch with people. If not, let me just encourage you, join with me and let's get back on the road again. And let's reach this broken, hurting world for Jesus. I mean, they are so open to the gospel. So
Yeah.
other than that, thank you for your time. Sure appreciate you guys. Love you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Marc, and thank you for being with us. Pray your richest blessings on your ministry, and hope to get to see you at Spire Conference and around at our other content that we have going. So thanks again for being with us, and hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. Hey, happy St. Patrick's Day, too. Didn't even say that yet. Enjoy it. All right, we'll see you guys.